There are basically two kinds of errors that people try to navigate when they talk about the human-animal relationship. And the two kinds of errors are, one is claiming that people aren't really that different when in fact they are, and the other is claiming that people are really different when in fact they're not. I do think it's easy to make both of those kinds of errors, and I do have a tendency to get polarized depending upon who I'm talking with. When I end up talking with very religious, dogmatic people, I end up very quickly pointing out the many ways that humans are similar to and are basically animals. That we are made of material and that we will die one day, and that we're not any more significant than any other animal. And I end up sort of playing that argument. When I talk with some of the contemporary atheists, I end up saying, no, look, you're misunderstanding the cultural nature of humanity and the problem of self relation and the way that language facilitates all this. So I guess I do find myself picking sides on which kind of error I'm going to make, depending upon the interlocutor that I happen to be talking with. Okay, so I guess I will grant that. I do want to talk more about this problem of what does it mean to say that humans are uniquely social. That, granted, there are social animals and animals that live in solitary ways. When we're talking about human sociality, it seems to be something qualitatively distinct, or at least a difference of degree that has become a difference of kind. Now, again, I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm not suggesting that, and I think this is part of the problem. I think that people are listening for me to be either religious or to be either a materialistic scientist, and then they want to pick polar to me, but I guess I'm trying to walk down that middle line. I don't have any commitments to either. I'm trying to ask an honest question and to interrogate it with an openness. I think people think that I keep wanting to force the issue. I've heard people, and I don't even care uh, the degree to which people want to persist in it, but people keep saying that I keep saying that we're special or that we're better than animals. I don't think you will find any video of mine where I say that. I've said a million times, I don't think that it's an honorific designation. I don't think that I'm saying that humans are better. If anything, we seem to be the most plastic. We seem to be the animal that is most subject to its own tampering, it's subject to its own conscious control and manipulation and self-cultivation. Okay. I think there are some forms of sociality that we could talk about. Now, one would be this question of writing or the question of forms of symbolism. Do those themselves turn us into a kind of social being that's different than the sociality of other organisms? And we can find this as we move up the phylogenetic scale. Okay, now, and I think part of the problem here, and the reason I stress language, is that metaphor really needs to be understood. Because I've heard people say, oh, well, baboon troops, they have culture too. And then when I go read the scholarly articles, the actual researchers who are doing this work on baboon culture and baboon troops, they always use scare quotes around the word culture. They recognize to some extent that this is a metaphor that we're using because we see a kind of similarity between animal culture and human culture. I don't think, though, that we want to say that the anthropology department is simply a subset of the biology department. That, to me, is a problem. It doesn't recognize the way that emergent differences crop out of culture. So let me see if I can get at this and try to talk about this issue of survival value and part of the problem of sociality for humans. The argument that I think I've been trying to make, or trying to see if I could get people's reaction to or response to, is that humans seem to be the most dependent upon others for their finishing and completing. That is, other animals are born with some genetic capacity to thrive with limited ability on their own. Now, again, as you move up the phylogenetic scale, it gets very difficult. But even, there's an inverse relationship between the number of the offspring and the time that it takes to raise that offspring, and that again, correlates to the phylogenetic scale. So as you move up, though, smaller and smaller amounts of offspring, and more time has to be invested into bringing that offspring into what it's going to need to thrive, in its environments. In humans, we are born literally open and plastic and with a need for cultural finishing or cultural rounding off. That is, a human doesn't really become human except and within the context of some culture, of some historicity, of some set of language practices. What I think that means is that humans have a kind of natural anxiety, uh, forms of anxiety and distress over their own self-worth and self-value, because at some level they recognize that it's been artificially imposed in them and upon them. It's not that humans don't have instincts, it's that our instincts have been almost rubbed so down to a nub that they get fulfilled by more specific cultural practices. So, just as an example, right? Humans seem to have a need for self-worth and self-value, partly because action in an animal that has self-awareness is very different than an animal that can be guided by instinctual actions. As soon as the actions have to be guided by conscious command and by decision and by choice, and as soon as those are, you know, culturally created and aware, that organism is aware of their cultural relativity or the degree to which other cultures don't hold those same practices, it introduces all kinds of anxieties and it does make for problematic action. I don't know that other animals consciously choose to become vegetarians or consciously choose to change their religion or consciously choose to break out of their family practices of how marriage is done. So I think when we move to human culture, the differences are what is so interesting. See, this is one of the great lines by Jamaka Highwater. He says that if we want to understand the nature of humanity, what we do is we don't go to all the different cultures and try to understand it by looking at what's common in all the places. We go to all the different cultures and we try to understand the sheer range of diversity and difference that culture has created. And as we understand humanity by understanding the differences, the range of the difference, not what's common across all of it. See, I think this is a really crucial point. When I hear people try to talk about how humans relate to other animals, can you see the problem? See, it makes it seem like humans are just categorically the same. Now, admittedly, animals aren't categorically the same either, but I don't know the degree to which we're going to want to say that that animal is radically, radically different. Now, let's take some examples here. We know from a lot of the work that's been done on just insects and in bees that bees have a waggle communication dance that's very, very complex. It's more complex than people first realized. It has to do with the polarization of the light in the sky and where the sun is, and it communicates various features about food sources and their directionality. But they found different dialects in different regions. I mean, it's very, very fascinating. But the bee never comes back and waggles as a practical joke where the food isn't. The bee, to the best of our knowledge, right, whatever this means, the bee doesn't have an individual variant freedom with regard to its own dialect. It's like a closed system that operates. And it's genetically hardwired in there, right? It's genetically hardwired. Now, humans arguably are genetically hardwired to learn their culture and to be open to cultural imprinting. And there's various mirror neurons that are a kind of time binding that allow us to learn from the actions of others rather than having to do them ourselves, to do those actions ourselves. I think that, okay, that's part of the dynamic, but I think we want to see it, the issue here is to what extent does that introduce a need for self-worth or self-esteem, and that's what could be seen as common, but across different cultures this will manifest itself in countless different ways. And so I don't see, I don't know how else to say this, right? That it's human diversity, which is part of the unique human sociality, that I think is at issue. Um, Try one last way. I think part of the question would be, what is money? And to what extent did humanity originate with some notion of money? That is, to the extent that the animals moved beyond mere necessity and beyond mere survival, but accumulated goods that could be traded in a barter system and then slowly paved the way for, I mean, literacy paved the way for the kind of standardization that is required for modern capital. I mean, money in the abstract sense, right? Currency rather than barter commodities or, token-like fetish objects that were traded amongst early peoples. I think this question, though, of to what extent is socio-historical existence a natural phenomena? See, I think that it is. I think that it's not that we're cultural rather than natural. It's that humanity is the site of nature that is open to being cultural in a very natural way. But what that means is that it's human variety and difference which is so crucial. That if we try to say, well, here's how humans are, we radically miss that humans aren't one more animal to be described in terms of what the animal's relationship is to its environment. If anything, what we find is that what had survival value was some notion of self-regard and self-relation that then grew and liberated into a variety of wild practices. And this wide variety of practices, um, they're not going to be, what I say, we can't just reduce them down to the biology. I mean, you could try to say that, but then the problem is, well, if they're reducible down to the biology, why in this one culture do they do this practice and another culture do they not? I mean, why in one culture do they have arranged marriages, in some cultures they don't? Why in some cultures would it be seen to be a punishment to have your own room, whereas in our culture it would seem to be a punishment to have to share a room? When you start to look at the way that people experience touch, the way that they experience distance, the way that they experience time, all of these, it becomes very apparent that they're culturally grounded. And the cultural differences make more of a difference than that supposed common thing that was leading to it, the organismal need to be culturally imprinted. So at any rate, I hope those are some of the contributions that I would want to make to this discussion about human sociality. Okay, thanks.